Well, guess what? It's day one, part two.
Day one, part two. Here we are, a year and a day
Yeah.
since we stopped recording a year ago. Remember, we started and did those 30 as a way of kind of, I think, helping us process through the pandemic. And we've heard back from a lot of teachers that it helped them to have something to kind of lean on professionally to take their mind off all the horrible things that were going on. So here we are. It's a year later. It's St. Patrick's Day. The only green I own is a green T-shirt. So sorry for being super cash today, but with a name like Kelly Gallagher, you'd think I'd have a lot more green.
You would think so.
That's it.
I don't know. I remember distinctly that we were coming up on that 30-day mark and I wanted to keep going. And I think that the reason I wanted to keep going was that it was somehow sustaining me, because March was really scary, really scary. And a year, as soon as we ended them, it felt like there was so many other things that got like crowded into our schedule, and that probably I really missed the opportunity to talk to people I love, highlight books I love, just like that continual thing. But you and I got really serious about writing the book at that point.
Well, what was nice is we continued. We just didn't record it. We had those conversations, and this isn't the purpose of this particular meeting or discussion, but yeah, I think the thing that took most of our time and attention is that Penny and I finished writing a new book, and it's now heading into production and will be out in the fall. I think that's about all we're going to say about it at this point, but we're really excited about it. And so we didn't just say goodbye to you guys a year ago and just completely relax. We went into very heavy book writing mode. And I remember I was having trouble chewing gum and walking at the same time, right? So I'm a morning creator, and we were recording a lot in the morning, and it was getting in the way of me trying to keep the book moving forward. And so I think that was healthy for me, is that I could put this aside. But I'm super excited that we're starting again. Maybe we could start by talking about I don't know, what have you been reading and writing, thinking about? How about reading? What have you been reading lately?
So it's funny because I keep a reading list in the front of my notebook, and this is my newest notebook. So if it's on there and it's not crossed off, then I'm still reading it. So right now I'm reading 7 things, and that is normal for me, right? I pick up something and I read for a while. I always have a book of poetry, and at the moment I'm reading The Responsive Weeds, which is Bertrand Bickersteth. So I'm reading a whole bunch of poets that are Canadian poets, and this one is Racism in Alberta. I just finished from Leslie Roach, and this one is called Finish This Sentence, which is the racism she experienced in Ottawa and Montreal. And so I'm really trying to understand in another country what this bigger question looks like through the poetry. And then I finished this, we both did. And I think this is the most important book I've read in a really, really long time. Just so much history. I was saying to Clint Smith, whose book I'm reading right now, that I think poets should always write history. There is so much poetic language in the way that he writes, and I felt that about Cast. It is written with such beauty.
It's such an eye-opener for me. We could go on and on and on about that, but I want to just say, for example, this idea that before Hitler came to power, as the Nazis were beginning to gain steam, one of the ways that they did that was they went to the American South, and they discovered how discrimination and racism was institutionalized and legalized. And this actually inspired the rise of Nazi Germany. I just think is just unbelievable.
It's a devastating book I think, for one, Pat and I were talking about this because he's reading it when we walked the neighborhood the other night, that the terms she always uses are dominant class and subordinate class. And it isn't, she's constantly making you look at the system and take it out of kind of the incendiary terms that people are using to well, I don't see race, I don't see color. She's saying there still is a dominant class here. It happens to be white people, and there's a subordinate, and these are the ways that that works itself out in the world. Besides slavery, and 240 years later, why isn't it different? It's because this system exists, and I think it should be required reading in high school rather than the history textbook. This would prepare students to see the world that is we're living in.
Institutionalized.
Mhm. It is in
Uh,
so many ways. So I also, I can't say enough about An American Sunrise. If anyone knows Joy, by the way, I'm dying to interview her for the summer book club. I happened to go on Audible because I was downloading a different book, and this was free on Audible. So not only do I have it, but I have sat there listening to her read it. And she read First Morning. This is the first morning we are without you on earth. And this is a short poem that will knock you out. And I thought
mm,
about how many people lost people
oh,
over this last year, that it's just, I'm so thrilled she's our poet laureate, because I don't know that I would have found her poetry. There's so many wonderful poets. What are
yeah.
you reading?
Well, I've been reading a lot. Two books that I'll mention briefly. One is called Extraterrestrial
Okay.
by Avi Loeb. This guy was, at the time of the writing of this book, was the chair of the astrophysics department at Harvard, a very well-known and very well-renowned scientist. And in this book, he argues that there is evidence that our world was visited from another solar system in 2017. And it sounds like a crackpot, and he is actually pissed off a lot of the scientific community. But it's nonfiction, and it's really it's short, but it's deeply philosophical. And I found it fascinating. And if you know anybody who loves astronomy or physics, because there's a little bit of physics in here that went over my head, that one was really rich. And right now I'm about halfway through reading Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, who won the Nobel Prize. I loved, The Remains of the Day is I love that book so much.
Oh,
But this one is so different, and it's a futuristic, I think it's going to be a dystopia. It's about a little girl who gets her own artificial friend. It's a robot, and it's the interaction between the two of them that's starting to go in a weird direction. And so I think it says a lot about that intersection of humanity and technology and where it might be going. And it strikes me as an easy enough book that you could even teach it. And, I might teach this to certain students, but I think this could be taught in a number of grade levels, or could be part of a book club in a number of grade levels, especially if you're doing anything with dystopia.
I was going to say Never Let Me Go. Do you remember that one? That would be another one that would be good in a book club like that. I was thinking also about the book club that we were in and or continue to be in, Homeland Elegies, which just knocked me out. There's so many reasons to be in a book club if you're not in a book club, because for me, it's always that someone else has a different take, and that you all of a sudden are listening a little differently. When you started talking about caste, I really tuned in, because I was like, what did Kelly remember as really significant there? Because I know it's going to expand what I remember and think about.
Well, I know you mentioned Homeland Elegies, and we'll put that in the Padlet thread. I actually think that's the best book I've read in the last year.
Oh man, so good.
It's phenomenal. So I recommend that. It's not an easy read, because of its structure, but I think it was fascinating. But what you just said reminded me of something that you posted a few days ago in your Twitter feed. And if you guys haven't seen it, go to Penny's Twitter feed and look for it. It's near the top. It's Brene Brown's podcast interview of a teacher by the name of Angus Fletcher, who has written a book called Wonderworks. And I have to say that,
isn't it Wonderkind? What is it? Is it Wonderworks?
Wonderworks, I think.
Oh my gosh, I'm reading it on my Kindle, so I can't tell. 'cause I don't see, it is Wonderworks. You're right. 25 most powerful inventions in literature.
Isn't that an interesting idea that there are human inventions
Mhm.
in literature? And I have to be honest, Penny, when you posted it and you said it was 70 minutes, I thought, probably not going to listen to that. But then you said it was so important that I went and listened to it. And once I started listening to it, I was all in. I think it has enormous implications for the teaching of literature. This idea, for example, that there are human inventions inside of literature. So, for example, a plot twist.
Mhm.
And by the way, this guy is this guy's a scientist. He studies the science of storytelling and what happens to the human brain and psyche when you read story after story. When you get to a plot twist, it's just fascinating, like chemically, what happens to you. And or an example he gave was like when a character apologizes.
Yeah, that.
Yeah, apology is a human invention.
Yeah.
And when you apologize to somebody, it 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 lets the person who you are apologizing to actually begin to have, even though they've been wronged, to start to have a little bit of empathy for you.
Mhm.
And I haven't read the book, and I know you've just started it, and I've ordered it, but he talks about 25 different inventions that are in literature,
Yeah.
that contribute to, like, our love, our empathy, our joy. And then of course it gets into, and I know you're going to interview him later, right, for the
Because I
summer book
totally
club.
fangirled him. I go find him at Ohio State, and I'm like, we're kindred spirits. Oh my God. I mean, it was just that kind of an email, and he was so generous. He's going to come on the summer book club for Book Club Foundation, which I'm
And
just thrilled.
and we won't jump that conversation, but I'm sure he's going to get into what this means as far as choice and forcing kids to read certain books, and what's the cognitive price of this, or what's the cognitive benefit of that. And I don't know. I recommend anybody listening to this to click that and spend 70 minutes listening to that interview. It was fascinating.
Yeah, we'll put that on the Padlet as well, because we have both kind of rediscovered the Padlet, which was a great place to hold the things we talk about. And so we're going to get together when this conversation's over, because I won't remember them all. And the books that we talk about and other things will be posted there, so they're easy to access. This is really an opportunity for us to just talk about our reading and writing since a year ago. So I want to switch. Kelly, what have you been writing about over the last year besides the book? What have you been writing?
Oh, you mean besides a book we spent a whole year writing?
Yes.
I haven't done a whole lot. The writing I've been doing, I'm not Penny Kittle. I don't write every single day in my notebook, but I've been writing a lot. When I read a book that's fascinating to me, I'm taking nuggets out of that, and then from there I'll take one of those nuggets and I might write a little bit. It's not an everyday thing for me, but as I mentioned to you before we came on, I've been having really second thoughts, and a lot of this comes out of the chapter we wrote that's coming out in the fall about the definition of essay and what's the best way to take kids who are compliant readers and writers and try to make them more engaged. I've been thinking more in terms of curriculum and how I might approach a school year differently, with the idea of sort of moving away from each defined genre in its place, and maybe creating, we think about this, if I write to a poem, I wrote to a poem because my daughter got married. That's something that happened in the last year, right? My oldest daughter got married. And so I write next to this poem, but as we have kids write next to poems in our classes all the time, right? But that writing might take me to start thinking about my grandmother, or it might, now I'm thinking about the Catholic Church's stance this week that they're not going to recognize same-sex marriage. So I might take this poem that's about marriage, but who knows, depending on my background, where I'm going to go with that, right? But I think in class, we often say, this has to be a narrative, or this has to be an argument. And, maybe we come back and do a session on this in this segment, in these 30, where we really kind of talk about more writerly choice. I think that kind of,
Oh,
my writing has led me to think about
mhm.
moving away from those narrow definitions.
Well, and for me, the journey was I was in the wide open writing workshop as an elementary and then a middle school teacher. But when I moved to high school, and this happened once during middle school as well, when I had 175 students, and for efficiency's sake started teaching by genre so that my mini lessons were about this and the conferences, because what I found was with 175 kids, when I was trying to confer and you were writing a poem and you were writing a story, that I was starting to get anxious about all the stuff that I couldn't organize well enough in my own head. And I feel like I lost something and became somebody who taught more genre units than process units than craft units, and that I've been trying to reach to get back there. The portfolio classroom I have at Plymouth now in the fall. And so I'm kind of excited about doing some work and some thinking with you about that. But as we're talking about writing, I do write almost every day. So these, I fill one in about 3 months. So this is March of 2020 through half of March of 2021, because I'm now into this one. And I was flipping through them thinking about how many really big things happened. And for me, it's kind of like I get up in the morning, I always read poetry and start writing and thinking and trying to, almost every day, not every day, but trying to figure out what is it that's lingering that I'm thinking about. Sometimes it's something from the day before, but it's almost like this has grounded me. And it really occurred to me this week that it is unlikely that anyone will ever read them, and that I'm perfectly okay with that, right? That all of these years I've kept all these notebooks, and I have notebooks for my kids, but think about our lives. My kids are so busy with their lives. When are they going to want to sit down and like read my notebooks? They're probably not. And so I was thinking about like what it's given me because it's just for me. And one of the things that happened, I told you about this, is I took a poetry workshop with Phil Kay, signed up because I saw it on Instagram. And in that night, on that workshop, he asked us to do this exercise where we had to picture a time, an age, and it could be like preteen, it could be 10 years or younger, and I happened to pick 10 years or younger. And then we just started with songs you remember, what you saw outside your window, objects, the worst hairstyle, outfits, sensory details for, once you had some ideas, grab one and now just do, what do you smell, see? Wow. And in all of that, this absolute mess is me trying to first write about the thing, which was strawberry picking to earn at 9 cents a pound money to spend as a kid. I think I'm certain I was 10, if not younger. But I wrote the strawberry picking thing and was done. But the thing is that writing kind of works on you. So I went back to it, 3 pages later, draft 3. I'm not done with it. I keep writing it. And all of a sudden, boom, I've shared this poem with you. At the end of draft 3, I realized there was a half of the poem that a half of the story that I wasn't telling, that is really part of the story. And all of a sudden I'm into, draft 4 now is an absolute mess. By draft 6, I'm pasting typed in drafts and revising, and I gave up on it. But that's what happens in the notebook for me, is that I can follow something until I hit on, wow, I didn't even know that was there. And it happens to be a memory that's really painful that I'm not sure I've thought about in 25 years. So that was really a journey.
You've said a few things there that I think have relevance to anybody who teaches writing. Number one is that you wrote 6 drafts, but it wasn't until your 3rd or 4th draft that you actually hit a vein that you wanted to follow. And again, we've said this, I think, even in the first series of 30, but we don't just write to spit out something we already know. We write because it leads us to unexpected places. The act of writing is generative. It generates, I love it when a kid asks you, when a kid says to you, I don't know what to write, and your response is,
that's right. Just
go ahead, start writing.
Something, right? It engages your brain.
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is that you gave up on it. I would put that in quotes, because now that's sitting there, and it could be 9 months from now, that there's all these nuggets that sit in our notebooks. And as I wasn't prepared for this, but I have a series of notebooks sitting right up here, that I could certainly go back, and maybe you never know when that line or that word or that phrase or that image or that scene is now ready,
Yeah.
right? And how many times is it kind of have to sit and percolate? I think kids think you have an idea, you write it, you get it down, you're done, and that's it. And that's not how the creative process goes. And then the last thing I'd say is, you might not think your kids are going to want to read these someday, but I'll give you, this is completely unplanned. We try to make these conversations pretty spontaneous, but sitting over here on my desk in a pile of papers, I was cleaning out some things yesterday, and I came across just the envelope that was in my father's handwriting. And just having that envelope is something that made me stop me in my tracks. And now, and it's funny because not I verbalize this with you, then I'm thinking that needs to go in my notebook and talk about that experience, and why, my dad died in 2012. Why is this hitting me like this today? And I think your notebook's, beyond being beautifully spectacular. I mean, if you want to look at a notebook nobody's going to read, let's look at mine. But I think the thinking that's in there, I mean, if I were your kids or grandkids, it might be 10 years after you're gone where that would be a treasure to leave behind.
I do think grandkids. I mean, I think that is, maybe you skip a generation and they're the ones who go, what? The world was so different. But Kelly, it's so weird because we didn't talk about this. This is one of the pages in my notebook, and what's in my hand is a Xerox copy of the only letter my dad ever wrote to my mom that I've covered my hand with. And what it drove me to do, what's in here, is, Daddy, it's been so long since we've had a cup of coffee together, talked about, I started writing to him. And all over this page is, it's 2021 and we've just survived a pandemic flu. I hope so. There is like, I like, whoa, I can't even write this. But think how powerful that is, right? To tap into an actual letter. What if you write to your father?
Yep. And that's the key. That's the key, right? How do we get writers to tap into that engagement? I'm sure that will come up in many of the subsequent 29 recordings that we're going to do. I want to let everybody know that it's not just going to be Penny and me yakking back and forth, but we are already beginning to line up guests, which I think we're going to try to launch next week. And so come on back to us, and I think you're going to see some really interesting and fascinating conversations, as we did have the first 30.
Yeah, and we'll put this on YouTube and on your website and on the Padlet. And on the Padlet, we'll have all the resources that connect to these talks. It's just, to me, such an honor to have teachers in our world that want to talk to us or want to listen to us and respond with questions and thoughts. And I don't know, I've become grateful, certainly in this last year, for so many things. And one of them is the community of teachers. And the other one is you've really changed my thinking. So.
Well, thank you. I mean, as I wrote, and I don't know if you've read it yet, but in the acknowledgments of our new book, I mean, what a privilege to sit next to you for a year and write, or 2 years, and write a book together is just, it's a dream, a good dream, not a bad dream.
It was a nightmare. Tell the truth.
But I remember when we did that workshop in Detroit in October, and a teacher said to us in October, the teacher said, I'm already April tired, right? Well, here we are, almost to April. And for teachers to hang in there, teaching in the teeth of a pandemic is just, it's remarkable. The teachers that I work with are exhausted, but they're so professional and they just love their kids. And so I'm hoping that these conversations give everybody a little bit of lift, a little bit of light as I hope we are beginning to emerge from this nightmare, this pandemic.
So true. So we will see you all tomorrow.
See you all tomorrow, everybody.
Bye.